The hard-working people of law enforcement often have very challenging work indeed, as they face horrors that you might never expect. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. When I asked my father to tell me some of the worst things he'd ever experienced in the police force, I never actually expected to hear the gnarliest story I had ever heard. He was often the first officer on the scene after a death was reported. Many of these cases were old people who had heart attacks or suffered similar, relatively bland fates by comparison. But every now and again, he'd get called out to help deal with people who had fallen asleep in the bath and remained submerged for days, sometimes weeks. He told us about the man who had one of those heating elements that kept your bath warm. He slowly cooked for 2 weeks before his daughter found him in what was essentially a human crock pot without the lid. That was bad. The other story is worse. Number 2. My roommate is a first responder. A few years back, the local Indian reservation was having a bit of trouble with a crack cocaine problem. Everyone knew who the big drug dealer was, but the RCMP's hands were tied due to the jurisdiction issues with the tribal police. Now, the tribal police had their own issues with corruption, case in point, and a convicted paedophile acting as a tribal police officer. Well, it seems that no one in law enforcement wanted to try and take this dealer down. So some of the tribal members decided to pursue justice in their own way. Anyhow, my roommate was working emergency services the night in question, and is dispatched to this dealer's house on the reservation. When he and his partner arrive, the house is surrounded by cops, guns drawn, and my roommate has to wait to enter until the property has been cleared. Finally, they get word that there are 2 casualties inside, probably both dead, but need to be checked out by paramedics before they can call the coroner's office. So my roommate grabs his bag and walks in. There, in a darkened living room, lit only by the TV, which is still on, he sees the dealer sitting in his easy chair, face up and remote in hand. His entire face is gone. He had taken multiple gunshots to the face and head. He knew it was futile, but he checks for a pulse, and of course there is none. But the cops then beckon him into another room, where the dealer's underage girlfriend is on the floor. She had been shot so many times in the torso that the only thing keeping her body together was her spinal column. My roommate didn't have to check to know she was very, very dead, and just told the cops to go ahead and call in the coroner. Now, he's seen a lot of messed up shit in his line of work, but he said the thing that he found the most creepy about the whole situation was the dude just sitting there watching TV with his face blown off. Laugh tracks going on in the background from whatever show he had on. He said it was something out of a horror movie. I don't think they ever arrested anyone for the murders, but I'm pretty sure they all knew who was involved in getting rid of their drug lord. Number 3. I'm not a cop, but I know a lot about the case and know someone personally who discovered it. In my city, at the Travelodge on the main commercial street, a few people who met on some dating site, or Craigslist, something, ended up ritually killing themselves inside one of the rooms. According to the police, the 2 people who found it weren't the actual cops, but rather the next-door occupants. They heard a commotion and looked out their door, only to find blood coming through the door like it was out of The Shining. They walked in to investigate and found the mangled bodies of the 2 women who found each other and the barely living body of the guy who found them both. As he told it, they were supposed to let him kill them both for the glory of Satan or some shit like that. Then he would kill himself. The crime scene was so gruesome and traumatic that several police officers and paramedics and nurses who treated the guy were all later treated for post-traumatic stress, and the incident has led the way for a movement calling for having PTSD therapy for first responders. Number 4. So, we get a call to do a welfare check. Someone called the station house because they hadn't heard from their mum and asked if we could pretty please swing by to check in on her. We get to the apartment building, knock on the door, and when there is inevitably no answer, we grab the super to open the door for us. The first sign that things are going terribly wrong was that the chain was still on the door. The second was the god-awful stench coming from the place that told us that there was something very dead inside. As before, it's dark in there, and none of the lights worked because they had burnt out in the time the poor lady had been sitting there. We found her on the couch, positive Q sign, which is hanging your tongue out of your mouth like you're dead, and the smell of the beginning stages of decomposition. So, it's the DOA, the cops in the living room, and the super standing in the doorway of this dark apartment. And we obviously have our flashlights trained on the guest of honor. At this point, the dead person raises a hand to her eyes in a very zombie-like fashion and says, "Nya," exactly like that. So totally zombie, right? Having seen enough of this, we, again, run out of there like we've seen a ghost. The super, who's not privy to the rise of the dead, sees 2 3-foot-6 cops thundering down the hallway at him and figures this was his cue to get moving too. Sadly, we overtake him and his stubby little legs and leave him to be dinned up by the zombie. Survival of the fittest and all right. We got down to the next flight before we figured out that even if it was a zombie, it was an old lady one, and we could probably kick its ass. We went back to the apartment and called an ambulance for her. She apparently had a stroke alone in the apartment and sat there for a few days. The hand and vocalizations were really all that was left of her brain responding to stimulus. We went by the hospital the next few days before work, but she was too far gone.